Have you ever found yourself confused by a woman's unpredictable behavior? Moments where charm turns to distance, affection flips to silence, or her desires seem layered in contradiction? You're not alone. Beneath the surface of the female psyche lies a complex, unconscious world, one she herself doesn't fully understand. Today, we delve into the forbidden layers of that mystery. Not to judge, not to blame, to see and understand. Of the female mind, like the male, is not primarily governed by logic or conscious intention. Contrary to what is often portrayed in modern discourse, much of a woman's behavior, desires, anxieties, and choices are shaped not by what she thinks she wants, but by what lies hidden in her unconscious. And unlike the male psyche, which may externalize its impulses more visibly, the feminine psyche tends to internalize, obscure, and complicate them. Her surface may reflect calm, confidence, or care, but the real engine of her psyche is composed of repressed desire, hidden trauma, early developmental experiences, and emotional residues that escape articulation. The unconscious in the female mind begins shaping her identity before she can speak. As an infant, the earliest bond, usually with the mother, is not just emotional but symbolic. This original relationship serves as her first model for love, safety, nourishment, and recognition. But as she grows and begins to differentiate herself from her caregiver, an inner fragmentation begins. She starts to ask, "Who am I without the approval of the one who first loved me?" This fragmentation lays the foundation for an internal dependency, an unconscious yearning to be validated, adored, or chosen, an echo of that original maternal gaze. But since this desire cannot always be fulfilled in reality, it often morphs into defense mechanisms that shape how she behaves later in life, especially in romantic relationships. At the same time, the emergence of the father figure, whether physically present or emotionally absent, adds another dimension to this unconscious architecture. He becomes the symbol of external order, of power, of otherness. The child does not perceive him as a mere man, but as a mythic representation of boundaries, dominance, and approval. For many women, the relationship to this father figure leaves a residue, be it longing, fear, idealization, or rejection, that gets buried deep in the unconscious mind. And it is this very residue that shapes how she will relate to men in adulthood. She may crave dominance or resist it. She may seek validation from powerful men or resent them. But in all cases, the unconscious has already decided long before her conscious mind thinks it has made a free choice. When she becomes a young adult, society tells her she is autonomous, that she is in control, that she is free. But the unconscious has no concern for slogans or ideologies. The unconscious is still haunted by the past, by what she could not express, what she was punished for feeling, what she feared would cause her to be unloved or abandoned. These repressed fragments of emotion do not disappear. They get buried and returned through symbols, dreams, irrational behavior, and especially through emotional intimacy. This is why many women may exhibit contradictory behavior in relationships: warmth one day, coldness the next, dependence disguised as strength, self-sabotage wrapped in the language of empowerment. This contradiction is not a flaw of character but a symptom of inner tension. The conscious mind wants security, maturity, logic, and control. The unconscious mind wants fantasy, intensity, redemption, and above all, recognition. Recognition not just of who she is in the present, but of every version of her that has been silenced, ignored, or invalidated. And when a man triggers these buried selves, whether through love, distance, or rejection, she may respond with reactions that surprise even herself. The conscious cannot control what it has never acknowledged. Add to this the societal expectation for women to be emotionally sophisticated, nurturing, and rational, and what emerges is an unbearable pressure to suppress any unconscious chaos. But suppression does not lead to liberation. It only leads to displacement. The repressed content of the unconscious will eventually leak through mood swings, projection, control-seeking, passive aggression, or emotional volatility. These are not conscious manipulations. They are eruptions of what could not be consciously integrated. In therapy, one often sees this moment of realization in women, that many of their conflicts are not with their partners, their careers, or their circumstances, with unprocessed elements of their psyche. A woman may feel lost not because life is hard, but because part of her inner world has been exiled. She does not want to be ruled by emotion, but emotion demands to be seen. She may try to use logic to solve emotional storms, but logic cannot reach the depth of the unconscious wound. That is why, even when things are going well externally, she may still feel disconnected or unsatisfied. The unconscious is not soothed by material comfort or outward success. It is only soothed by acknowledgement, by becoming conscious. This is the dark truth. The woman who appears in control may not be in control at all, not because she is weak, but because she is unaware of who is really steering the ship of her mind. One of the most misunderstood forces shaping the female psyche is the phenomenon of emotional projection. Projection is not a deliberate act. It is an unconscious mechanism by which the individual displaces inner conflicts onto an external figure. In the context of female psychology, this projection often centers around male figures, especially in romantic or intimate relationships. At the heart of this dynamic lies what many psychoanalysts have termed the father complex. This complex is not merely a simplistic desire for a father figure. It is a symbolic entanglement with authority, security, affection, and unresolved longing. The roots of this complex are laid in childhood, during the early phases of psychological development, when the father first appears not just as a biological parent, but as a towering archetype. He becomes the first other, someone who is not the mother, not part of her immediate emotional world, but someone whose approval or attention must be earned. In the eyes of the little girl, the father represents law, boundary, and recognition. Whether he is warm or cold, present or absent, consistent or erratic, her unconscious will absorb his energy as a template for what male authority feels like. This template, especially when unresolved, will continue to shape her emotional experiences far into adulthood. If the father was emotionally distant, the child might internalize a sense of emotional unworthiness. She may spend her adult life seeking out emotionally unavailable men, not because she desires pain, but because her unconscious seeks to resolve the original wound. Each new relationship becomes an unconscious reenactment of an early drama. If I can make this man love me, then I will finally be worthy. But because the root of the desire is not in the man, but in the unresolved pain, the pattern repeats endlessly. The relationship ends, she feels abandoned, and the cycle begins again. On the other hand, if the father was overly controlling or domineering, the unconscious may respond with a defensive rebellion. She may reject traditional forms of affection, resist intimacy, or even develop an overt distrust of male authority. But beneath this mask of resistance lies the same core conflict, the desire to be recognized, affirmed, and seen by the masculine presence. She is not fighting the man in front of her. She is fighting the shadow of her father that lives inside her psyche. The tragedy is that neither she nor the man she projects onto may be aware of this internal theater. In therapeutic settings, many women confront the realization that their current emotional pain is not caused by the person they are with, but by ghosts from their past. She might accuse her partner of being too distant, too cold, or too dominant, when in reality, he may simply have triggered an old emotional wound. The unconscious mind does not differentiate between time frames, a gesture, a word, a tone of voice. Any of these can activate deep, unhealed memories of childhood experiences. In such moments, the woman may find herself overwhelmed by feelings that do not match the present situation. This is not irrationality. It is emotional time travel. The father complex also manifests in more subtle ways. A woman may unconsciously compare every man she meets to her father, whether she realizes it or not. If he was successful, she may feel drawn only to high-achieving men. If he was neglectful, she may confuse emotional absence with normalcy. If he was affectionate, she may unconsciously expect all men to intuitively understand her emotional world without communication. In all these scenarios, the real man is no longer being seen. He is being filtered through a psychological lens built long before adulthood. This projection can also flip in unexpected ways. In some cases, the woman may take on the role of the father, seeking to control, discipline, rescue her partner. This reversal of roles is often a form of compensation. If she never felt protected or seen, she may identify with masculine energy as a way of shielding herself from vulnerability. She becomes what she once sought, not out of empowerment, but out of defense. And while this may provide short-term psychological safety, it often leads to emotional isolation, confusion, and unmet needs. The most disorienting aspect of emotional projection is that it often feels entirely real. The woman genuinely believes the man before her is the source of her joy or sorrow, the cause of her fulfillment or despair. But in truth, she is in dialogue with a deeper part of herself, an exiled self that still longs for repair, love, or recognition. And until this unconscious projection is brought into conscious awareness, she will continue to repeat the pattern, often with increasing frustration and despair. Men who find themselves in relationships marked by such projections often report feeling confused. One day, they are placed on a pedestal. The next, they are treated with suspicion or cold detachment. The woman may not be aware of how dramatically her perception shifts, because it is not her rational mind making the judgment. It is her unconscious reacting to unresolved emotional content. The partner becomes a symbol, not a person. And symbols, unlike people, are never enough. At the core of every psyche exists a battle, one between the instinctual desire for pleasure and the demands of reality. This conflict is universal, but in the feminine psyche, it expresses itself in ways that often appear mysterious, contradictory, or even self-defeating. The pleasure principle operates from the deepest unconscious layers and seeks immediate emotional satisfaction, security, adoration, and romantic fulfillment. It is not concerned with consequences, logic, or future outcomes. It is, at its essence, a primitive force that longs to restore a lost sense of inner wholeness, often through emotional experiences that mirror childhood safety or fantasy. Opposing this is the reality principle, which is developed later through societal conditioning, education, and painful experience. It urges patience, long-term thinking, and emotional discipline. The female psyche lives suspended between these two poles, and the tension between them gives rise to much of the inner confusion she cannot explain, even to herself. From a very young age, the girl is exposed to ideals of romantic fulfillment. Fairy tales, cultural expectations, and subtle social messages teach her that emotional rescue is always near, that someone or something will satisfy her longing. This fantasy becomes embedded in the unconscious, fused with early memories of love, affection, and idealized care. The pleasure principle feeds this narrative. It whispers that true satisfaction will come when she is adored, desired, and completely seen. It convinces her that emotional wholeness lies not in herself, but in a moment, a perfect gesture, a perfect man, a perfect relationship. But as she grows older, she inevitably collides with the reality principle. Life does not unfold like a fantasy. People are inconsistent, affection is conditional, and love often comes with responsibility, sacrifice, and the need for self-reflection. This collision generates a deep and silent frustration. On one hand, she may desire deep intimacy, connection, and vulnerability. On the other, she fears dependence, disappointment, and betrayal. The pleasure principle urges her to chase emotional highs, to be consumed by romantic intensity, passion, and validation. But the reality principle warns of emotional entrapment, loss of autonomy, or heartbreak. The result is often a form of emotional paralysis. She moves forward, then withdraws, she opens, then closes, she attaches, then tests. To the outside observer, she may seem inconsistent or manipulative, but in truth, she is caught in a psychic struggle between desire and protection. This internal battle is especially intense in intimate relationships. The woman may find herself craving the safety and emotional intensity of a deep bond, but once that bond begins to form, the reality principle awakens, reminding her of past wounds, vulnerabilities, and risks. The emotional intimacy she once desired begins to feel threatening. She may unconsciously create distance, provoke conflict, or sabotage the very connection she longed for. This is not an act of cruelty or irrationality. It is the unconscious attempting to resolve an impossible contradiction. The wish for total safety through another person and the simultaneous fear of being emotionally overpowered or disappointed. Furthermore, the pleasure principle often disguises itself in seemingly rational decisions. She may say she is leaving because her needs aren't being met or because she feels unappreciated. But beneath these statements is often an unconscious disappointment. The reality failed to match the fantasy. The partner could not sustain the emotional ideal that the unconscious projected onto him. She may then seek out new experiences or relationships, driven by the same unconscious hope that this time will be different. Yet each new encounter is haunted by the same unresolved tension between what she feels she needs and what the world actually provides. The culture surrounding her only intensifies this conflict. Modern narratives often tell women they should follow their hearts, never settle, or trust their feelings. But feelings are not always expressions of truth. They are often signals from the unconscious, shaped by wounds, projections, and unmet childhood needs. When she confuses emotional urgency with truth, she may pursue paths that feel right in the moment, but are deeply misaligned with long-term peace or stability. This creates a cycle of regret, confusion, and even shame. She wonders why she keeps making the same choices, why she feels so misunderstood, or why happiness feels just out of reach. The answer lies in the unconscious dominance of the pleasure principle over the quieter voice of the reality principle. The reality principle is not cold or repressive. It is the part of the psyche that seeks integration, maturity, and balance. It does not deny emotion. It places emotion in context. But for many women, embracing the reality principle feels like a betrayal of their deepest longings. They may associate emotional discipline with detachment or emotional numbness. In truth, it is the gateway to authentic strength. Only when the unconscious desires are seen clearly, without being blindly followed, can the woman begin to navigate her relationships and inner world with clarity. The internal split between the pleasure principle and the reality principle can also affect her sense of identity. She may feel torn between who she is and who she thinks she should be. On one side, the pleasure-driven self wants to be desired, adored, and pursued. On the other side, the reality-oriented self seeks independence, structure, and self-determination. These two selves often find themselves at odds, leading to emotional exhaustion, dissatisfaction, or disorientation. She may shift between them depending on context, audience, or emotional state, resulting in a fragmented sense of self that is hard to reconcile. In the modern age, the image of the independent woman is celebrated. She is portrayed as self-sufficient, emotionally untouchable, and immune to vulnerability. Yet beneath this curated mask lies a paradox that few dare to examine. The more fiercely a woman clings to the image of control, the more deeply she may be repressing the very parts of her psyche that require attention. The unconscious, unlike the ego, is not impressed by external performance. It is not concerned with how many achievements one acquires, how composed one appears, or how eloquently one speaks about strength. The unconscious demands truth, and truth, especially emotional truth, often arrives as a contradiction to the story we tell the world. Many women adopt the mask of independence not out of confidence, but out of defense. Somewhere in their developmental timeline, vulnerability was met not with comfort, but with disappointment or betrayal. Perhaps her emotions were invalidated in childhood. Perhaps she was told to be strong, stop crying, or not be too sensitive. These messages, repeated over time, instill the belief that emotional exposure is dangerous, that showing need is a weakness, that being dependent is shameful. So the psyche responds by building a fortress, layer by layer, where the softest and most instinctual parts of her personality are hidden even from herself. What the world sees is composure. What the inner world experiences is isolation. This self-protective mask often becomes so convincing that even the woman wearing it begins to believe it. She convinces herself that she doesn't need anyone, that love is optional, that emotions can be managed like tasks on a list. But repression does not eliminate emotion. It merely displaces it. The feelings she buries begin to resurface in other forms. Irritability, control-seeking, chronic dissatisfaction, emotional numbness, or even physical symptoms can all be expressions of a repressed psyche that is no longer able to carry the weight of denial. And because these expressions are indirect, she rarely links them to the emotional needs she refuses to acknowledge. This is especially visible in intimate relationships. The woman who has spent years cultivating an identity around independence often finds herself deeply unsettled when true intimacy threatens to expose her inner emotional world. She may enter a relationship seeking connection, but as emotional closeness intensifies, so does her need to reassert control. Vulnerability becomes intolerable, not because it is wrong, but because it was once unsafe. She may begin to distance herself, emotionally detach, or become overly critical, not of her partner, but of the feelings he evokes in her. These reactions are not strategic. They are unconscious attempts to avoid the reawakening of buried emotional material. Modern narratives often encourage women to seek power through detachment. They are told not to care, not to feel too much, not to rely on others. And while these ideas offer a temporary sense of control, they often create a deeper form of repression. The natural human need for emotional expression, closeness, and receptivity is not gendered, it is universal. But when these instincts are pathologized or suppressed, the woman becomes emotionally split. One part of her yearns to be held, seen, and known. Another part punishes her for this desire, labeling it as weakness. Inner conflict often creates cycles of push-pull dynamics, where she simultaneously desires and rejects the very intimacy she longs for, even outside of relationships. The repressed psyche shows itself in moments of solitude. The woman who claims not to need anyone may find herself overwhelmed by an inexplicable emptiness when she is alone. She may distract herself with work, self-improvement, with social validation. But the silence always returns. And in that silence, the truth of her emotional world begins to stir. Repressed needs begin to rise like ghosts. She may recall moments of childhood vulnerability, teenage longing, or adult heartbreak that she had long buried under the weight of productivity and resilience. These memories are not weaknesses. They are signals that her independence has become a disguise rather than a reflection of inner wholeness. Repression often goes unnoticed because it is praised. The emotionally distant woman is admired for her strength. Unfeeling woman is respected for her logic. The woman who doesn't let anyone in is romanticized as mysterious. Beneath these titles is often a person who has learned to survive, not to live. Her emotional world becomes a museum of locked doors, each one containing an aspect of her she has disowned. The more locked the doors, the more difficult it becomes to understand why fulfillment always feels just out of reach. The mask of independence is also reinforced by cultural messages that reward stoicism and punish emotional transparency. The more she performs strength, the more applause she receives. And yet, this applause becomes another prison. To maintain the illusion of composure, she must continually repress any part of herself that contradicts the image. If sadness arises, it must be hidden. If longing appears, it must be denied. Over time, she may lose access to her own emotional authenticity, not because it has disappeared, but because it has been buried so deep beneath the performance of strength that she no longer recognizes it as hers. Eventually, this repression may manifest not only psychologically but physically. The body begins to carry what the mind refuses to feel. Anxiety, tension, insomnia, chronic fatigue, or digestive issues can all be the body's attempt to express what the conscious self refuses to speak. These symptoms are not purely medical, they are symbolic. They reveal the toll of disconnection. The psyche will always find a way to speak, even if it must do so through suffering. The female psyche is not a surface to be quickly read or easily interpreted. It is a vast landscape shaped by unconscious forces, early emotional imprints, and silent inner conflicts that unfold far beneath conscious awareness. While society praises her for being composed, independent, or emotionally intelligent, few understand the price she often pays beneath that surface. What appears as contradiction, distance, or unpredictability is not simply a flaw of personality. It is a consequence of unresolved inner battles between her hidden desires and her need for control, between the longing for connection and the fear of emotional exposure. Her unconscious is not her enemy. It is the keeper of her truth. But when that truth is denied, projected, repressed, or masked, it expresses itself in ways that even she cannot predict. She becomes confused by her own reactions, disappointed by her own choices, and haunted by a sense of inner unrest. To understand her is not to decode her actions, but to look deeper. To the childhood narratives she never questioned, the wounds she never addressed, and the emotional instincts she was taught to silence. This exploration is not meant to judge, simplify, or diminish the complexity of womanhood. It is meant to illuminate. Because only when we are willing to see the unconscious, its desires, its defenses, its memories, can we truly understand what shapes the emotional lives of women. And only then can we begin to relate not just to what she says or does, but to the silent forces within her that she herself may not fully know.